Welcome to the first webinar session on Your Data, Your Answers. My name is Sharon McDonnell and I am an epidemiologist here at GrassrootsHealth. In this series of free webinars, we will share a first look at the data provided by our D-Action participants. D-Action is a population study conducted by GrassrootsHealth looking at vitamin D status and various health outcomes. The data presented in this series is preliminary and has not yet been published. This session will cover the graphs and charts sent out in our weekly email newsletter during the past month. We will also answer many of your questions regarding these topics. Some questions can't be answered with our data, but we plan to address many of those questions in upcoming Scientists Answer Your Questions webinars with topic experts. The next few charts show the basic demographics of the D-Action participants, where D-Action participants reside, and comparisons of serum levels by geographical location. Currently, there are over 6,000 D-Action participants. About 2/3 of the participants are female and 1/3 are male. Almost half of the D-Action participants are between 40 and 59 years old. About 1/3 are 60 years and older. 19% are between 20 and 39 years. And 3% are under 20 years old. This map shows where D-Action participants reside around the world. Countries colored with darker greens have more participants than countries that are lighter green. The D-Action study has participants in every U.S. state and in 45 countries worldwide. 80% of the participants live in the United States. And of the participants living outside of the United States, 46% live in Canada, 30% in Great Britain, 4% in Australia, 4% in Japan, and 16% live in other countries around the world. Looking at the United States, states colored with darker green have more participants than states that are lighter green. 26 states have at least 50 participants, and 17 states have at least 100 participants. California has the most participants with over 1,000, and Mississippi has the least participants with 4. This map looks at the average serum level of participants' first test for each U.S. state. States colored with darker orange have higher average serum levels than states that are lighter orange. Across the United States, the average vitamin D serum level for participants' first test ranged from 35 nanograms per milliliter in Delaware to 55 nanograms per milliliter in Kentucky. The overall average serum level for the United States was 46 nanograms per milliliter. The overall serum level increased 3 nanograms per milliliter between the first test and the most recent test, and this data is not pictured here. 90% of the states increased their average serum level from their first to most recent tests. And as a note, Mississippi is white because there are too few participants in that state to have a reliable serum level estimate. These charts compare the average serum levels of different geographical regions of the world. The x-axis shows serum levels and the y-axis shows the number of participants. The green bars indicate where 40 nanograms per milliliter is on the graphs to show how many participants are below and above the serum level associated with the prevention of many diseases. The graphs show that the average serum level was highest in North America with 46 nanograms per milliliter and lowest in Asia with 28 nanograms per milliliter. Also, about half of the participants in North America and Oceania have a serum level of 40 or above, compared to 40% of participants in Europe and 16% of participants in Asia. In these next few graphs, we will look at your answers to the survey questions regarding sun exposure and use of indoor tanning. We included all tests since sun and tanning exposure patterns can vary for each test. This graph shows average serum levels on the y-axis and average daily time spent outdoors on the x-axis. The amount of time spent outdoors with exposed skin was determined by the number of minutes spent outdoors between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. while taking into account sunscreen use and typical clothing during the 6 months before the blood spot test. This graph just includes the participants who reported not taking vitamin D supplements in the prior 6 months to exclude the effect of supplement intake. As expected, the graph shows that serum levels increase as sun exposure increases. Specifically, for D-action participants, vitamin D serum levels rose about 1.2 nanograms per milliliter for each additional 15 minutes spent outdoors in the sun with exposed skin per day. There are common myths that walking back and forth to your car every day or spending 15 minutes in the sun with your face and arms exposed for a few days a week will provide you with enough sun exposure to obtain adequate serum levels. However, this graph shows that it takes on average 2 to 4 hours in the sun daily with 50% of your skin exposed to reach 40 nanograms per milliliter with just sun exposure alone for this cohort. I want to mention that this does vary person to person, and there are many individual factors that affect vitamin D metabolism in the skin, such as age and skin pigmentation. In the future, we will also look at sunscreen use and typical clothing as individual factors. This chart shows the vitamin D status for participants who did not use indoor tanning in the prior 6 months, those who used it a few times, and those who used it regularly, which is 1 to 3 visits per week. Like the previous graph, this graph just includes participants who reported not taking vitamin D supplements in the prior 6 months. Almost 70% of participants who use indoor tanning on a regular basis had a serum level of 40 nanograms per milliliter or higher, compared to about 25% of those who never or infrequently use indoor tanning. The next couple graphs will look at the vitamin D supplement types used by D-action participants as reported in the questionnaires. This graph shows the percent of participants taking each vitamin D supplement type. The gel caps are the most popular with 48%, and powder is the least popular with 3%. A number of you responded to our survey asking if there were types that were hard to categorize and why some types were more popular than others. You mentioned that gummies, powder capsules, and instant dissolved tablets placed under the tongue were difficult to categorize. Also, those taking multiple supplement types were only able to choose one type in the survey. We really appreciate that feedback and will be looking into how to address these issues with our questionnaire. You also mentioned that gel caps are popular because they are easy to swallow, convenient, and it is the type that is most available at stores. You also mentioned that gel caps and pills are easier to take an exact amount compared to liquid and powder. Also, many people reported that powder was the least popular because it is inconvenient to transport and mix with liquid. This chart looks at the average serum level for each supplement type among 4 different daily intake levels. The intake amounts on the x-axis are the average amount of vitamin D taken in supplements per day over the last 6 months. We looked at different vitamin D supplement intake levels to keep that variable consistent when comparing supplement types. From our data, there does not appear to be a difference in the average serum level between supplement types. A common question we receive from participants is whether vitamin A intake affects vitamin D serum levels. Evidence suggests that excess vitamin A can bind to the vitamin D receptor and partially block vitamin D action. Of note, this question refers to vitamin A as retinol or retinol palmitate and not beta-carotene. Overall, 34% of participants report taking vitamin A as retinol or retinol palmitate in supplements. Of those who take vitamin A, the average amount is 5,400 international units per day. This graph shows vitamin D dose-response curves with daily vitamin D intake amounts on the x-axis and serum levels on the y-axis. The blue line is participants who take 5,000 international units or less of vitamin A per day, and the red line is participants who take more than 5,000 international units of vitamin A. Participants who take greater than 5,000 international units of vitamin A have a lower vitamin D dose response than participants who take 5,000 international units or less. But the difference between these curves is not statistically significant, and the curves are fairly similar below 20,000 international units of daily vitamin D intake. This graph is our first look at the relation between vitamin D and vitamin A among D-Action participants, and we do plan to investigate this finding further. Also, we will be discussing additional research on the interaction between vitamin A and vitamin D in an upcoming Scientists Answer Your Questions webinar. A question that is commonly asked is how much vitamin D do I need to take? The next couple slides will take a look at this question. For disease prevention, it is important to achieve a serum level of 40 nanograms per milliliter. As you can see in this graph, at each daily vitamin D supplement intake amount, there is considerable variability in the resulting serum level. For example, we have some people who are taking 1,000 international units of vitamin D and have levels above 100 nanograms per milliliter, and others who are taking 10,000 international units of vitamin D with levels around 20 nanograms per milliliter. So we encourage everyone to get tested and find out your serum level. Then, once you know your serum level, you can look at this chart which shows D-action participants' responsiveness to supplement intake based on their initial serum level. So, if you are starting at a serum level around 20 nanograms per milliliter and you want to get to 50, it's going to take about 4,300 international units per day to get there on average. It might take more and it might take less. Again, there is considerable variability, and our recommendation is always that you test. We also receive a couple of questions about toxicity levels. The Institute of Medicine, which is an extremely conservative body, has indicated that 10,000 international units per day is considered the no adverse effect level, so there is significant margin of safety there for all of you. Also, there were no adverse effects from toxicity below 200 nanograms per milliliter, according to a 2007 paper by Dr. Hathcock in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Lastly, we received some questions submitted by our participants that I want to go over and provide some answers to. First is, why do some states or countries have more participants than others? And so we have more participants in certain areas due to exposure to the D-action study and local interest in the project. We are always looking to add more participants and would love to expand to more regions around the world. Second is, why are there so many deficient participants in Asia? And this is likely due to differences in sun exposure and changes in diet. Many people in Asia avoid the sun to keep their skin as light as possible, and some even wear gloves while driving to keep from being in the sun. Also, there used to be a significant portion of fish high in vitamin D in the regional diet, but there has been a move towards a more Western diet, which can cause increased deficiency. The third question is, did the graph on sun exposure include those who use indoor tanning? And did the graph on indoor tanning take sun exposure into account? And so for the graphs on sun exposure, it does not include participants who use indoor tanning, and vice versa. The graph for indoor tanning did not take outdoor sun exposure into account. One of the things that we will do in the future, though, is separate out the effects of sun exposure and indoor tanning on serum levels. The fourth question is, why is sun exposure between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. important? What about morning or evening exposure? And so the afternoon is important because vitamin D production from UVB rays occurs during this time. UVB rays from the sun are obscured by the atmosphere when the rays come in at different angles in early morning or late in the afternoon. Question number 5 is, what supplement type or brand do you recommend? And so our data shows that there is no difference in the average serum level between participants who take different supplement types. So we don't recommend one type over another and would encourage you to use a supplement type that works for you. Also, we would suggest that you take a name brand or one that you see has a quality reputation. Question number 6 is, why are there only 4 categories of supplement types? And so when D-action started almost 5 years ago, vitamin D supplements were not as readily available as they are today, and these were the most commonly available types at the time. Now that it's more readily available and more supplement types are on the market, We are going to look into making adjustments to our survey to accommodate these new types. Question number 7 is, what does statistical significance mean? So significance is a statistical term that tells how sure you are that the difference or the association exists. It measures the likelihood that the result occurred by chance. So generally, if there is at most a 5% chance that the results happened by coincidence, then those findings are called statistically significant. Lastly is Grassroots Health looking at vitamin D status and diseases. So our questionnaire asks about a variety of disease outcomes. And yes, we are actually currently looking at health outcomes like diabetes, heart disease, breast cancer, colds and flus, falls and fractures, and many, many more. So stay tuned for future Your Data, Your Answers newsletters. I want to thank you all for attending today, and we will continue to send out Your Data, Your Answers graphs in bi-monthly email newsletters and be discussing the data and your responses in regular webinars. Also, in September, we will be resuming Scientists Answer Your Questions, where vitamin D experts will be presenting their research on specific topics and answering commonly asked questions. For all current D-Action members, don't forget to renew your subscription, and if you are not a member of D-Action, join now. Again, thank you all for attending today, and we'll see you soon.